Welcome to Plus One Forward, the podcast powered by the Apocalypse, where we talk about tabletop role-playing games using or inspired by the Apocalypse engine. I'm your MC, Rich, and I'm joined by my co-MC, Rach Shelkey. How you doing, Rach?
I'm doing pretty good, Rich. So, thinking about our movie night episodes, right?
Yes. Oh, man. Thank you, everybody, for all of the positive feedback for this new style of show that we have. We are looking forward to recording the next one, but that's not this, right?
I was ready to dig into our next episode. Do you want to give any spoilers or no?
Oh, well, if they hear about it, they might be furious.
I was ready to dig into our next episode, but then I thought of two interesting but slightly dangerous words. Cinematic role-playing.
Okay, what is this thing?
Well, it's kind of what we're talking about a little bit with the movie night episodes, right?
True.
But isn't PbtA rooted in, rather, story gaming? So how do you do cinematic role-playing and cinematic discussion with Powered by the Apocalypse? Oh no, this is going to be one of these what are games discussions, isn't it?
No. 3 hours long and we never come to any point because we will actually each other to death.
So let's take a little bit of a sidebar and talk about cinematic role-playing and how we can explore cinematic role-playing empowered by the Apocalypse.
Let's do it.
So, Rich, what does cinematic role-playing mean anyway?
I know this one. I know it. It's acting out movies and rolling dice. It's kind of like the Dragonlance modules that let you play as Raceland or Flint, where you just rehash the plot of the books, except now you do it for movies, right?
So cinematic role-playing is like fanfic role-playing?
What?
Well, you make your cute little self-insert character and you take them through adventures and plot beats from that TV show or that movie you really like.
That's true. Okay. Well, we've solved it then. That's what we do. Cinematic role-playing is like role-playing fan fiction.
Yep. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And, okay, I guess we should seriously actually discuss what cinematic role-playing is. I sat down with Google one night to try to piece together what the community thinks cinematic role-playing is. Spent lots of time wandering around the internet, reading thoughts from bloggers and other gamers. Mostly, I found people looking for cinematic play were looking for games and systems that reflected an experience similar to watching a big budget Hollywood production. They were looking for a game that asked for a certain level of emotional investment from the players that was rewarded by cool situations and challenges presented by the GM. Think of your favorite TV show. There's characters you care about. Bad things happen to them. They stop the bad thing, even if just for the moment, and roll credits.
I find that some of the more conventional RPGs harken back to fantasy or science fiction novels as their primary inspiration. I mean, there's a reason for box text and 500-page rulebooks, you know? People like to read. That's not to say that game or any game can't be played in a cinematic style, because they can. But it's about the tapestry that you build and the pieces that you put into it. For me, a steady diet of TV and movies influence the medium of communication for the games that I play in today. And cinematic play is an evolution towards that more than a revolution in anything that we do.
I definitely think you're onto something with that idea. I think it's worth noting that genre fiction, as we know it today, being this very popular type of TV or movie, really didn't exist in the early days of role-playing games. I have older friends, for example, who talk to me about how there were screening rooms at early gaming cons that ran the 1958 movie The Vikings, because it was one of the few movies that encapsulated what it felt like to be a D&D adventuring party. That completely blows my mind. Like, I'm so used to going, oh, you know, those ridiculous fantasy movies from the 1980s, like Ladyhawke or Beastmaster, Kroll, the Conan films. If I were to say, okay, I really want sort of that D&D experience in film, I have all these things that came out after 1980. Mm-hmm. There wasn't much before.
No, there wasn't. It's interesting how And I know this is a bit of a tangent, but books and movies have often flowed back and forth into each other with RPGs somewhere in the middle, right? We have Tolkien, we have Moorcock, we have Vance, and those influenced early D&D, and then D&D became its own kind of thing. And then all of a sudden in the 80s, we have these movies that flow back to, hey, this is how we can say D&D is in popular media. It's fascinating. I love that kind of ping pong back and forth between the ways that our culture have evolved games and media in different tracks, but the two have communicated back and forth to each other, I think.
Oh, yeah. I have a whole sidebar about cyberpunk aesthetics that we won't get into right now that go to things that aren't cyberpunk, that predate Blade Runner, and then seeing, oh, well, you look at these previous films, you can sort of see where some elements of Blade Runner's design come from, and that influences a lot of things after the fact. And it's very hard to figure out where one concept or one sort of visual cue begins.
Oh, true, but tread lightly, my friend. If you talk of cyberpunk, Fraser Simons may come fight you.
Oh, let's not summon Fraser right now. So the more pieces of media we have and the easier access players have to them, the deeper, richer a library we have for visual shorthand and cinematic cues. There's certain concepts and shots. You know, if you have someone being sulky, standing in front of a sunset in silhouette, that should bring up a particular type of emotion and feeling to players at the table. If you're like, I describe my character brooding.
About power converters at Tashi Station.
Oh my God.
Sorry.
Of course, this summary might not cover you, the listener's specific views on cinematic role-playing. It does give us a little bit of space to work with today. I found the mechanics really didn't feature too deeply into the discussion about what made a system cinematic. There were discussions about house ruling parts of a system to streamline play, but nothing along the lines of a game that uses a D20 is inherently more cinematic than a game that uses 2D6.
That's generally fair, but I do want to gently push back and say that I've found that cinematic style of play is easier with systems that don't have multiple levels or steps in resolving conflict or have a variety of different subsystems to do discrete actions.
Why do you think that is?
It's primarily a factor of pacing and handling time. The more that we go to dice, the more that we take our eyes off of each other and look at the table or into books, the more that pacing falls apart. And so that pacing to me is a big, big part of cinematic action in role-playing games. Speaking of Tashi Station and power converters, maybe Star Wars could be a starting point for talking about cinematic PbtA?
I think Star Wars is a fantastic starting point for talking about cinematic role-playing and how we can make it really sing with Powered by the Apocalypse. I'm a big fan of West End First Edition Star Wars, specifically First Edition. It might not be the first cinematically inspired role-playing game in that there were systems like James Bond and Ghostbusters that came out before, but I think Star Wars is a great place to start in terms of cinematically inspired role-playing. Star Wars isn't necessarily the first cinematically inspired role-playing game in that there were earlier systems like Ghostbusters and James Bond 007, which are very clearly based off film franchises. But in my mind, Star Wars might as well be like the granddaddy. There have been Star Wars games since the early 1980s. There's a lot of cultural knowledge about the game and expectations about what is Star Wars and is this game invoking Star Wars. And it's got a bunch of visual cues that are very cinematic.
Absolutely. And you know I love me some Star Wars. I mean, I run it every week, but unfortunately not with First Edition West End Games D6. Sadly, I got to jump around and do some PbtA and some other crazy, weird little systems. But yes, Star Wars as a subject and also the RPGs, specifically D6 and the Genesis system from Fantasy Flight, both of those have been very cinematic.
Yeah, I dug out my copy of First Edition Star Wars to see what it says about role-playing games based off movies. They don't call it cinematic role-playing in the book, Instead, they touch on a couple of points about what makes this particular game different from other games on the market at that time. The bits that I think are the most interesting are parts of the GM role that are called out in detail are sustain suspension of disbelief and set the tone, as well as refereeing and playing the supporting cast. The sustaining disbelief section discusses how to make the world feel more real for the players. The setting the tone section discusses, among other things, how to make the lives of the player characters interesting by pulling in ideas from the Star Wars setting, as well as science fiction in general. These 2 points sound awfully familiar, right? The agenda for Apocalypse World informs the MC to make Apocalypse World seem real and to make the player characters' lives not boring. I think this gives us a little bit to work with here.
Hold on, Rach, I have to stop you for a second. Are you saying that other role-playing games have an agenda? That you're saying that PbtA is not the only RPG that has an agenda? I'm not sure if we can do that in this show.
They don't.
Rach.
Well, they don't call it an agenda exactly. It does open the GMing section, though, and it's in the place where you would find the agenda in a Powered by the Apocalypse game, so you might not be that far off.
All right, fair enough. I guess we'll have to allow it since there are other RPGs in the world. Carry on.
After I noticed the agenda, I skipped ahead in the Star Wars role-playing games and took a look at the newer and also much thicker Edge of the Empire rulebook.
Size does matter in conventional RPGs.
In like first edition, I think the GM section starts on page 26.
Oh man, that's great.
In the Game Master section of Edge of the Empire, there's a little bit of advice on how to keep the game, and I quote, feel like something seen on the movie or TV screen.
Nice.
Key points include keeping a fast pace, making the game entertaining, and including moments of high drama and tension that are balanced with humor. The book also notes the GM should stick close to the expectations of the setting. Now, these sound a little bit like Apocalypse World principles. For pacing, we can look at respond with fuckery and intermittent rewards. To compare the references to tension, we could look at the Apocalypse World principle, look through crosshairs.
Yes, I love it. Yet again, PbtA is a thing that we've been doing all along. It's just formatted differently with different terminology.
So in conclusion, if we look at the Star Wars systems as systems designed to make a more cinematically inspired experience, then look at the parallels that we can see with Apocalypse World, of which many Powered by the Apocalypse games are derived, I think there's a pretty good case to be made that PbtA has a tool set that we could tap into for cinematic play.
Very well done, Rach. Thank you for setting the table for this conversation.
Okay, Rich, so how do we go about directly doing that now?
I think that we need to kind of break it down. We need to talk about the framework. We need to talk about what the GM or MC can do. We need to talk about how players can do it, right?
Right. So the one concept that comes up over and over is pacing. Pacing is very important to the cinematic experience. Tight pacing is cited often as something that makes a game feel more cinematic. Powered by the Apocalypse has a pretty easy answer for applying pacing. After a roll, the fiction changes. The plot moves forward.
We said it before, I'll say it again. When someone rolls a 6-, it never means nothing happens.
A t-shirt with this slogan really ought to be coming out soon on the +1 Forward store, right?
That's it. That would be a shirt I'd wear.
So make a roll, fiction changes. What else can we do? Jumping between player characters when the party is split up. That seems like a great way to keep things moving, right?
Absolutely.
While making sure everyone is included in play is just good MC practice, another twist you can apply is framing these jumps in cinematic terms. One technique I like to keep an eye out for is a character saying something that sounds like it would be the setup for a jump cut to another character in a TV show. Like they make a reference to a character we haven't seen in a while, or a reference to what that character was doing last.
Yeah, That's perfect. A great time to cut away is also when the player rolls a 6-. Set up the hard move or hint towards it, then cut away to someone else. It's really fun to let that tension ramp up and then dangle out a bit of mystery. What are they going to do to me, right? Another benefit of jump cutting is that it allows for a variation in pace and tone. So a single long combat that takes half an hour is a slog. But you take that same combat, intersperse it with updates on what the other PCs are doing, it allows you to escalate the combat's stakes every time that you come back to it, and it never lets any one person sit idle for too long.
Yeah, I can think of, again, an Apocalypse World game where I was playing the news, and obviously as news I wasn't directly involved in combat, but the MC would take a step back and say, okay, seeing what's going on in this battle, what are you reporting on now? How are you framing it? And what do people know?
Oh, that's really clever. That kind of reminds me of the Worldwide Wrestling RPG, how, two players who aren't involved in the match will be the ring announcer types or commentators. That's really clever. I like that.
I also like that mechanic in Worldwide Wrestling too. When cutting from one character to another, have that new character, to steal Jason's words, paint the scene. Describe to us in detail the setting and the world they're inhabiting, what's going on around them. Give the other player characters a moment to sort of exist and dwell on what the world is before the MC comes and turns everything upside down.
Absolutely. But be ready as an MC. Be ready to prod and suggest if you see them hesitate or stall. Pacing is key. I often will prompt with a multiple choice rather than a yes or no because, you don't want to lead them by the nose. But if you see somebody kind of hitch up like, I'm not, well, it could be this or it could be this thing over here. And then I'll often end it or something else entirely. And then you've opened it up again, but you've at least drawn a couple of paths that they can either follow and you can yes and, or they can ignore the two, but you've given them enough of an idea or an inkling to where they frame into a new mindset and they will answer you. But yeah, really be ready. Throw the ball that way, but if you see them hesitate, that they don't dribble, they don't go for the layup, then make some suggestions. Try to keep things moving.
Yeah, open-ended questions and a little bit of guidance in case the player stalls out.
Right. So let's talk about encouraging players to emotionally buy in. This can be a thing. Cinematic role-playing, to me, is high octane. It's pushing things to the more extreme a little bit, right? It's very kinetic. There's a lot of cliffhanger action going on, cross-cutting, all of these things that are very visual and kind of loud. So what are some ways to get the players to emotionally buy into this, to be comfortable trying this out? I found that framing devices like camera angles and camera shot styles help to give the group permission for those showy and bold actions or statements.
This idea is so neat to me. I've often heard of the rule of cool in role-playing games, which is if the player wants to describe the cool thing, you let them describe the cool thing, but it takes that rule of cool away from player action, which can sometimes result in players escalating to outdo each other, and putting it more in scene and setup. You frame your character to be a badass. It's like when you see the character for the first time, what are they doing and what makes them distinct? And it is a little bit less of people doing reckless things for the sake of doing reckless things. I think it adds a lot of flavor.
I've actually picked a little hint from you, Rach, in that sometimes players they're very third person, they're a little more reserved, they try to speak in broad terms. Okay, well, my guy's going to head down and he's going to talk to a few people and try to work things out. And what I've stolen from you liberally, Rach, and I'm not going to give you credit. Oh, wait, I just did. Is what does that look like? That's very cinematic. Okay, great. That's your intent. What does that look like? Tell us, paint the scene for us, like draw that picture, put the camera focus on the way that looks like. You can even it could be a musical montage, right? Use that sensory idea, but put it on screen for us.
I like the idea where you present the example of you have a more reserved player saying, I talk to various people. I talk to a couple of people. And in the MC position, you could say, that's great. We zoom in on you at this point in your search. What does the person you're talking to right now look like? What question do you ask them? What's their reaction? And we don't have to go into fine detail about what that player character, NPC character conversation is, but we get a lot of flavor out of that again.
One of the things that I like for encouraging players to emotionally buy in, stole this from Ryan Macklin, ask players who would play their PC in the movie of our game.
Oh, I have mixed feelings on this one.
Yeah, I know, it's not perfect. There are some people like, I don't know actors.
Oh, that's where I fall.
Yeah, and that's rough. I'll often say, oh, okay, cool. Well, like, do you know any characters from a particular movie that's a little bit like yours? Oh, it's kind of like that guy that was in the Doctor Strange movie who, oh, yeah. And somebody can throw that out and you can go down the path of who that actor is or who the character is. It can be a little sticky. Choosing an actor isn't something that I would do necessarily at a convention with a bunch of folks that I've never played with before. It might be a thing that I use with a home group or someone that I've played with multiple times. I have a comfort level. Oh yeah, this person thinks in movies, they think actors. That's kind of a cool thing. Another thing that I do specifically for online gaming is I always make a space in the character keeper, which is our custom kind of gauntlet style, spreadsheety, cool character sheets that are group oriented. So everybody's on the same sheet. Is I put a space for the image of your character. So not just a few like words that you pick. Like in PbtA, you will say, oh, well, it's transgressing, dark eyes, shaggy clothes, right? That gives me less of a picture. But if you actually go into a Pinterest void and come out with a few pictures and drop that into our character keeper, I find that really helps me with a cinematic style of play because we've got that, oh, yeah, no, your steely eyes. Yeah. And so I can describe that. It's much more visual for me.
I had finding an actor backlash onto me in a ridiculous way once, but I struggle a lot because I don't really have like a stable of actors in my head. So I sat down at IMDb one day and went, okay, good looking actors, male, mid-30s, and just let it ride in the search and went through and went, oh, okay, here's this actor. He looks kind of like my interpretation of the character. We're going to go with this. And then my friends, Kate and Rob, were like, oh, we're going to find GIFs of our actors and then GIF spam each other in chat. And I kept finding these weird GIFs of my particular actor, which were funny out of context. And then it turned out the character he played on a particular very popular TV show is not really a good person. He's kind of like the opposite of everything my character is. And it just became hilarious.
Yeah, I can see that as
a... Oops. I didn't change the actor. Although I will put one aside. With Rob's actor, Rob took a model and then I was walking down one of the streets in Toronto and I looked up and I saw a 2-story billboard of Rob's character.
That's great.
Be careful of who you pick for your actors.
Fair enough. Sound effects are another way to get folks engaged. Whether you have them on a soundboard on your phone, I have used that in Star Wars no less, for blaster bolt sounds or lightsabers firing up. It gets a very strong reaction from people. You can also make sound effects with your mouth because as an MC, you really can go there. And by doing that, moving around, acting up, it gives the other folks permission, right? If you're willing to be the weirdest one at the table, other folks will loosen up. And if they don't, have that conversation, but often I've found that it's more successful than not.
Yeah, be the example and then let people find their own level afterwards in terms of what ridiculous things they want to do.
Kibitzing, encouraging players to throw in suggestions when a player needs to frame a scene can be really helpful for keeping everyone engaged and thinking of the movie that we're all playing in. When I say that, I also want to caution MCs and other players. Be mindful of sharing the ultimate decision for things. Is one voice louder than the others? Redirect it. Step in, right? As the MC, you can say, hey, I'd like to hear from so-and-so. Is one voice quieter than the others? direct the final question to that player, give them the spotlight. So yes, kibitzing is great, but if you find out that when 4 players are having a conversation that one of the 4 players' answer is the one that everyone gets quiet for, make sure that even if it's, oh yeah, that's a great idea, if they do it like 3 times in a row, that 3rd time, I'm not going with what that person suggests. I'm going to pull it out of someone else, just specifically because we're all here to play. And even if Joe is over there and he's still having fun being a participant, I want to pull some stuff out of Joe because he's here to play too. I need his ideas, this collaborative thing.
Yeah, we've talked about in the past about making space for and encouraging other people to present their ideas, because it could be something of a confidence issue where another player or an MC might not feel confident committing to this idea that they think is really cool, but they aren't sure if everyone else thinks is equally cool.
And a lot of those ideas are great because they will tilt a scene and give us new directions and inspirations. And almost always when people are like, well, I kind of thought of so-and-so, but I was a little afraid that it might be weird, we always make it work. And I'm like, yes, that was great. Yes, thank you for that idea. That is awesome.
As an aside, something I do with PbtA campaigns specifically is I have a conversation during our session 0 about what types of media have inspired the players to come to the table and play this game. And I find that there's a little bit of sharing of different pieces of media. And sometimes some of the players will go out and watch a movie or watch a TV show, and that will help inspire them to bring more ideas to the table if they weren't considering it. For example, I like Monster Hearts a lot, but my experience with teenage-themed fiction tends to lean more towards anime. I never really got into teenage live-action TV shows, so I've never seen Riverdale. I saw half an episode of the new Sabrina before I was like, yeah, this isn't for me. But at least I know if those shows come up in discussion, I could kind of go and do some summary reading and figure out what from those stories really inspire my players and consider how I can work those back into the game.
It also creates this neat sharing of culture between the table. You're talking about a campaign. PbtA really works best, especially Apocalypse World, in 8 to 12 sessions. So you get an opportunity to learn about things that other people at the table really love and adore, and teaches you something new that can inspire your play. I think it's a great idea. And then I saved this for last because it would be last. It's epilogues. Learn this from John Stavropoulos. Epilogues are an amazing capper for a one-shot or at the end of a mini-series. What is that? Epilogues are where you as the MC carve out a portion of maybe 10 minutes before a game is set to end. You know this is the last session, and you say, all right, this is the post-credit sequence. This is what we see after this story comes to its conclusion. We're running out of time here, but I want to see 2 years, 5 years, 20 years ahead of time. What is it that we see with your character? And I even jokingly say, if you want to have Stanley do a cameo in your post-credit sequence, you're welcome to go ahead and do that.
What's been the best Stan Lee cameo you got?
I can't recall one offhand, to be honest. To me, though, the epilogue is the best way to help players put their PC to bed, as it were. It helps save me from that post-game conversation where the group is like, I just wanted to keep playing my PC. Can we, go play again? Or it's like, we really want to make this happen. If they have that epilogue, it's a great way for them to say, yes, I got to see this character's story come to some kind of satisfying conclusion.
Have you ever done the epilogue where it's framed as next week on masks, for example? Or do you find that doesn't present as satisfying a resolution to the players?
A next week on an ongoing game is a really neat idea. That is a mechanic in Primetime Adventures that I adore. The thing about the next week on is if you allow it to inspire folks for future things, it's great. If you use it as a checklist of boxes that you have to mark in the next session, it can be really awkward.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, we haven't seen the scene where you got punched through the pavement because nobody kind of went that direction or no one got into a fight. It can be odd, and then it can kind of be a little unsatisfying. Like, I really thought we were going to have a fight near a pavement. So you have to be careful with it. But I think using it for inspiration is great. One of the things I do in a Masks game that I'm currently running with the Intercontinental Group of Awesome is what I call the last page. And at the end of every session, I do a last page, which will either reflect events that just happened from the viewpoint of an NPC or of a major character, or it will show kind of off-screen badness and let them know about a threat that is coming their way. And the last page has been a really fun way for me to not necessarily epilogue, but do that next time on.
Oh, that's super cool. I like that. I'm going to steal it.
Go for it. It's yours.
Now we've talked about ways to bring more of the cinematic into Powered by the Apocalypse. Let's take a little bit of a moment to think about what happens when the cinematic clashes with Powered by the Apocalypse. What happens when being cinematic means you're not saying what the rules demand, for example? In Apocalypse World, one of the rules for the conversation is for the MC to always say what the rules demand. To quote the rulebook, same with the game's rules, play with integrity and an open hand. The players are entitled to the full benefits of their moves, their roles, their character strengths, and resources. Don't chisel them, don't weasel, don't play gotcha. The surface read here is to not screw around with your players and mislead them. On the other hand, let's talk about the worst case scenario. If you're playing with integrity, what happens when the player character makes a bad roll and loses all their hit points? What happens when the player character dies? There's certain expectations with cinematic role-playing. In more traditional mainstream media, we expect character death to have some sort of significance or meaning behind it. With role-playing games, however, it can just happen due to bad luck. There's some Powered by the Apocalypse games that have fail-safes to deal with this. In Apocalypse World 2nd Edition, you have the ability to come back, albeit changed by your experience. In Monster Hearts, you lose all your hit points, you become your darkest self. In Monster of the Week, there's always the option to resurrect dead hunters.
It doesn't have a problem associated with it.
Not at all. Oh, I came back with more weird. That can't possibly be a bad thing, can it? These failsafes, though, don't address the sting that comes from having a bad roll, which can snap someone's sense of disbelief completely away from them. How do we handle that while also staying true to what we're supposed to uphold as an MC?
I hear you, Rach. I've been there when I blow 3-4 rolls in a row and I feel like, oh, I'm the worst character in this group. I'm dragging them down. I couldn't buy a 10+. Let's just hope that in the game you're playing, XP happens on a miss and, maybe next session you'll be got a new move that saves your bacon. I have a few thoughts about this, though. A 6- means the MC makes a move, which doesn't have to mean that the player fails. It doesn't have to mean that the player takes damage and reaches that point where they're going to die. There are some options you have. You can announce off-screen badness that triggers right after the PC succeeds at the thing that they wanted to do. You can take away their stuff. They shoot the guy, but something causes them to drop their gun. Activate their stuff's downside. Yep, you shot the guy with your messy shotgun, and you got some blood in your eye. None of those had your character die. All of those are legitimate reactions from a 6-. Also, check back in our feed for the Threadbare episode where Stephanie Bryant excellently gives ideas on handling failure in interesting ways. To me, if the players set up a situation to their advantage, if the effort seems like it should succeed, but they've engaged that move, they roll that 6-. As an MC, you can make a move as hard or soft as you like. This means you can have them succeed at their thing but trigger some other threat or challenge. You don't have to kill their character. That said, from the player side, this is not a Powered by the Apocalypse game. It's a game of Spire that I recently played in. Spire's Grant Howitt's newer game. It's about drow kind of as terrorists against the High Elves. It's really neat. In that game, I was playing a character. It was the fourth of 4 sessions. They were to a big duel, and Ivaran, the beautiful actor that I was playing, was having to do a blood opera duel, and I literally failed 3 rolls in a row. There's no XP in a miss in this game. And to me, as a player, I read the room. We're in a blood opera. We're in the last session of the game. I have failed 3 rolls in a row. And I took that initiative as a player to say, I want to take this by the reins. The dice are telling me where this story should go. And I said, I think Ivaran goes down. Right? That wasn't where Darren, the amazing GM, was guiding things towards. That wasn't the call he was necessarily going to make. But when I see that, and I think, what is the coolest, most interesting thing that could happen here? That was where I felt like it should go. Judd Carlin said to me once, we're playing a story game. Sometimes a character dying is the story that you tell. And that sucked to hear because I think that was right after one of my characters died. But sometimes that's the story that happens. You can play cinematically and still have your character go out in really cool ways. Yondu in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, spoilers, there are ways that you can cinematically tell your character's end to where those failed rolls and the hit points and everything, you can still be true and say what honesty demands and do it in a cinematic way.
I completely agree. Death has a big place in cinematic storytelling. And Yondu in the second Guardians of the Galaxy movie stands out as there was a lot of levels going on with that particular sequence.
Oh, yeah.
You want that death to feel meaningful and resound with the characters and the players. And when you look at gaming in the cinematic lens, something you should keep an eye on is making that space and letting the players exist in those moments and build their own meaning out of the sequence of events that's just occurred.
Absolutely. Well, Rach, I just want to say for our listeners, you did almost all of the heavy lifting on making the cinematic role-playing episode work. Thank you so much for all your hard work, for bringing this thing to an amazing outline. Thank you so much for all this work. It's just a wonder to be a partner with you in this.
And I mean, the examples and the experiences you've brought from your games, I think really fleshed out this episode and help demonstrate the ideas I had presented in the outline.
Awesome. So, folks, we've got the Twitters, and we are always open to feedback. If you've got thoughts on cinematic role-playing, make sure to listen to the outro of Paul Edson's dulcet tones as he tells you how you can get in contact with us. Well, thanks, Rach.
Thank you so much, Rich.
And thank you, listeners.
Plus One Forward is a production of the Gauntlet community, Richard Rogers and Rach Shelkey. You can find us at gauntlet-rpg.com or follow us on Twitter at @+1FWD. If you would like to support our show, visit our Patreon site at patreon.com/gauntlet. The games mentioned on this show use the Apocalypse engine, which is a creation of Vincent and Magay Baker. The music for Plus One Forward is from the Savage Aural Hotbed CD Gomi Daiko. The songs used are Gomi Daiko, Metal Version, and Hammer of Bill. You can find more amazing tunes by Savage Aural Hotbed on their website, www.savageauralhotbed.com.
Hi listeners, I want to tell you about the Gauntlet Patreon. The Gauntlet is one of the most active, vibrant communities in tabletop role-playing games. We produce podcasts, the Codex Zine, Gauntlet Hangouts, Gauntlet Con, and more. If you love small press, independent tabletop role-playing games, the Gauntlet is for you. And you can help keep things going by pledging to our Patreon. This year we have 4 different pledge levels for you to join at, each of which comes with a number of benefits. At the $2 level, you get early access to our actual play podcasts, including pocket-sized play, as well as a special Keeper of the Gauntlet title. At the $5 level, you also get a PDF of our monthly zine, Codex. Your name and Keeper of the Gauntlet title is listed in the back of each issue of Codex while your pledge is active. At the $6 level, you also get access to the Gauntlet Slack group, which is the heart of our community. And at the $8 level, you get early RSVP access to new game events on Gauntlet Hangouts. The $8 spots are limited based off how many early access players we think the Gauntlet Hangouts calendar can support. Every month on the 15th, we will make a small number of new $8 spots available. So if you want to play games with the Gauntlet, make sure you keep an eye on our Patreon page around that time so you can grab one of those rare spots. Finally, every member of the Gauntlet Patreon, no matter the level they pledge at, gets to attend GauntletCon each year for free. GauntletCon is our incredible online gaming convention with over 200 game events and panels, competitions and prizes, and our bumpin' GauntletCon Discord server. Folks, we can't do all this awesome stuff without you, so go check out our page and please consider pledging. We're at patreon.com/gauntlet. Thanks.